She's got more of All right, guys, we will get started today. We have a really good show for a Friday on a glorious day here in Central Virginia. Friend of the program and someone we admire, Kathy Galvin, is in studio for 20-25 minutes here as we talk upzoning, as we talk current trends and storylines in Charlottesville. We're hearing through the grapevine with very reliable folks that we trust that an interim city manager will be named very, very soon. We'll talk the election. She knows Juan Diego Wade quite well from her time on the school board. We'll talk some Brian Pinkston. We'll see if we can figure out a plan to stabilize what's happening here in Charlottesville, which is no easy task. We very much admire Kathy Galvin and everything she has done for this community, and we're very excited to spend 20 minutes with a former city councilor here who knows the inner workings of City Hall better than, just about everybody. She's done it. She's been in the trenches. Judah Wickower, my friend, you are our North Star in our director compass. The show is yours, sir. We can get started when you're ready. Good Friday afternoon, guys. My name is Jerry Miller, and welcome to the I Love CVille show. Thank you for joining us on a just beautiful fall afternoon here in Charlottesville. Of course, we're live in Central Virginia, the Commonwealth, the country, and the world on the I Love CVille network. Today's show is very much what the network is all about. We bring stories that matter on a device that's in everybody's hands. And we take the topic matter that can be sometimes complicated and many-layered, and we do it in approachable fashion. Whole concept of the network is to bring knowledge to you. We're presented by Dr. Scott Wagner of Scott Wagner Integrative Medicine. Our friends at Ting Fiber Internet are the crazy fast internet behind the I Love CVille network. We love Ting. We love Skooma Boutique Dispensary in the downtown mall. And our newest partner, the Boar's Head Resort, an event that's starting in November, a winter wonder, where they light up the Boar's Head acreage with twinkling lights all over their grounds for families and parents and grandparents and couples to enjoy during the holidays. We cannot wait to tell you more about that. But folks, let's talk topics that matter. And if you'd like to offer some perspective on the show, leave it in the comment section on all the social media platforms you're watching upon, and we will relay it on air. Judah, if you can go to the studio camera, please, and let's welcome just a fantastic person and Kathy Galvin to the show. Kathy, good afternoon. How are you?
I'm doing quite well. Thank you very much, Jerry. It is a beautiful day, and I always enjoy being on your show.
Well, thank you for coming. I will compliment you on the very great look here. I love the jacket. I love the haircut. You look fantastic.
Well, I'm the longest surviving member of the city council, and I've been off council for 2 years now, and it's extremely therapeutic.
I was going to ask you that. Is it refreshing?
It's refreshing to be off council. So my hat goes off to those of you that are still serving, and my hat goes off to you that are going to serve. It's a very challenging job.
We have an election coming up. We'll get to that. We'll get to Mr. Pinkston, Mr. Wade. We'll get to the trends that are going on. First, you. What's filling up the time these days? How's life?
Life's going very well. I am very busy with my own practice. I've got architectural work. I've got urban design work. The balancing act right now is to juggle it all at the same time, maintaining some of the lessons I learned during COVID, which was you've got to exercise, you've got to eat right, you've got to make sure you get enough sleep and spend time connecting with the people you love. So all of that was happening during the lockdowns that we all experienced, and now that it's all ramping up again, wanting to make sure I keep that peace of mind going. And, I still have my dog, still have my wonderful husband. My son got married. My
Wow.
firstborn got married last August. That was big news. And then I have a son that lives in Richmond. My married son and my daughter-in-law, Anna, are in Washington, D.C. So we are growing as a family and thriving as a family. And I can only thank the powers that be for that.
I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad to hear you're doing well. You are radiating positive energy.
Yeah.
We can do a little, assessing, some crystal balling, some Monday or Friday afternoon quarterbacking here on trends that are happening in the city. I'm going to get out of your way. Where do you want to start here with the dynamics in City Hall?
Well, I've been reflecting about City Hall quite a bit. As I said earlier, I was on council for 8 years, so I guess that does make me the longest surviving councilor in the area. I think David Toscano might have served 12 years, but be that as it may. I was on council at a time when I actually experienced a form of leadership through Satyendra Huja. He was the mayor for 2 terms, two-year terms, and I learned quite a bit from Huja. And I saw in him a person that built teamwork. It made the mayorship one of extreme selflessness, and it was all about kind of enabling the other legislators, the local legislators, to get their work done. Constantly touching base with us on the phone, but also going out to monthly lunches. And then before that, I was on the city school board, elected school board, and that's where I first met Juan Diego Way. We served together. And again, another collegial group of people that their mission was what's best for our children, and they had a really strong grounding in policy. We learned policy, we learned regulation, and then we had a very strong CEO, and that person was Rosa Atkins. So the idea was you do policy, you hand it off to your executive, that executive implements, and everyone knows their lane, and then everyone can do their best work because you know what your job is. Huja was that kind of leader as a mayor, and I do think we are in need of clarity in what this form of government means in terms of leadership, both as the leadership on the council and then the leadership within the government bureaucracy itself that is hallmarked by the city manager. So those are some just examples that I have in my own memory banks and what I hopefully brought to the table when I was on city council. The idea of being a team player, the idea of not shining a light on yourself, the idea of listening to the public constantly and that you are their servant. So those are the lessons I learned and what I hope with the values I brought to the table at that time.
I think you did. I think you absolutely did. I think today, with what's happening in Charlottesville, it is convoluted, it is distracted, there's discord, there is concerns with leadership and staying in the right lane, and it's frustrating not only for folks within the building who voice their frustrations to us off the record, but it's frustrating for us as business owners and taxpayers in this jurisdiction. First, Mr. Chip Boyles, who I've said on this show many times, I have tremendous respect for. What did you make when you heard of his resignation?
I think like a lot of people in the city, it was, oh no, what, how, why? He was doing what seemed to be the bidding of the council. He was bringing on good hires, he was filling vacancies, and he was creating a sense of mission among his staff. I won't get into the particulars of the dynamics on city council with Mr. Boyles. I will just say that, again, my relationship with Mr. Boyles predates his time on the city as city manager because I worked with him on the Thomas Jefferson Planning District Commission. And that as the executive director of TJPDC, he's also the key person on the Metropolitan Planning Organization. So I was on the MPO, which is all the transportation policy of the Charlottesville-Albemarle area, and then I was on the Planning District Commission board. So I actually was on the board that hired Chip Boyles to be the executive director of TJPDC. So I knew him very, very well, and he always had great ideas, and he was going to bring a lot of those ideas to the table in Charlottesville. So I wish him well. I wish him all the good fortune in the world, and I want to thank him from the bottom of my heart. And I will say, too, I also admired Teron Richardson. I wrote a letter to the editor about Teron Richardson, and that I felt that the press was very negative, and I just listed the positives that that person brought to the table, and he was extremely experienced, as was Chip. So, and both of them were, I will say, hired to be change agents, hired by the council to create positive change, to, yes, fill vacancies, but to put the bureaucracy in a course of being mission-driven and effective and customer, citizen-oriented. So my concern is now was, looking back, did the council at the time understand what that change was that they were asking these two gentlemen to do? Was there a communication breakdown? When you hire people to effect change in your organization, you need to give them leeway to do that. And instead of getting in the way at every step of the way when something didn't seem right. Again, it's the keeping in your lane, and especially when you've hired someone specifically because you wanted a change in direction for the organization. So that's hopefully something that the new council coming on board will have time to reflect on. They've got to build a new team. There's got to be really strong leadership on council when whoever they elect their mayor to be. I would hope that they learn some lessons from Satyendra Ahuja, for example, and see how the citizen, the servant leader model works, and that one that builds collegiality so that the other councilors get their resolutions, get their legislation passed. Because otherwise, the city is not going to move forward. And several councilors, current councilors, have already said that without the executive branch working, the legislative branch's policy is not going to be implemented. And so that's the challenge. And now we've got a very big policy issue sitting before us, which is the future of the built environment of the city of Charlottesville, the comprehensive plan, the future land use map, and zoning. These are gigantic pieces of policy. And then the zoning begins to be the biggest tool to implement that policy. So that's why the policy and the tool, the future land use map and the zoning, have to be really in sync. Because otherwise, you'll have what we've got now, which is, oh, your comprehensive plan says this, and your future land use map says this, your zoning does this. I really like what the future land use map says, so I'm going to push that. Oh, no, I want to stick with zoning. I'm going to push that. No, you've got to get them in sync so that you begin to be that very efficient government that ultimately is a cost-effective government that ultimately leads to better, less expensive development, period.
Great take there. Questions coming in for you. Folks that read your editorial in the Daily Progress. Folks asking about Dr. Richardson and whether we should bring him back to stabilize the government. We'll get to these comments. Folks asking of your take on FLUM. Not a crazy fan of the acronym, but it's the future land use map and upzoning. Folks asking how we got to this point with local government. I'll get to these guys, and if you have questions or perspective or some praise for Kathy Galvin, put them in the comment section and we'll relay them on air to the former city councilor. I've called this election, which is November 2nd, I believe, as the most important election in Charlottesville city history. Now it's compounded by having to pick a city manager on top of the upzoning, and that's divided the jurisdiction. How do you characterize this November 2nd election and its importance for Charlottesville moving forward?
Well, number one, take a deep breath and vote.
I like it.
I just did that today. It feels
She's got
really
the
good, really good. So just go do it. And it's also at the state level too. I just wanted to say that the state level is really important. But right now we are at a point in this city where, and quite frankly, we haven't been stable since August 12, 2017. And kind of riffing a little bit on a line that Joe Biden uses, we've got to demonstrate to the public that government works. A lot's at stake here. We were all and out threatened that day by a groups of people that did not believe in our form of government, didn't believe in our values. And so we need to demonstrate that this little progressive city can have a very effective, efficient government, and that we get stuff done. And stuff done in a way that's also is a product of a very thoroughly engaged public. The policies that are implemented have a very clear rationale that's substantiated with evidence. And that I'm an architect, I'm an urban designer. I've lived in this city for, 37 years. I know a lot about what this community values in terms of its built environment. They like things to be of a certain scale. They want things to be walkable. And above all, they want it to be an inclusive, welcoming city. So given that, it's not an either or, no zero-sum games. It's not only the built form. It's not only the social economic agenda. It's all of it. And so when I look to the future, we desperately need leadership, and we definitely need policies that speak to the values of the community. So, for example, I just kind of have this phrase, you need to design your density. It's not just density, because just density alone without conditions means you're not going to get affordable housing. Density without physical form conditions doesn't mean that you're going to have a place that looks like the Charlottesville we all love now. It will look like a totally different place. And so that's what I'm saying. It's to be effective in government, you need to really engage your public. That means informing them, not just telling them what you're going to do. We need affordable housing. Okay, so how much? How much when we grow do we cross that line when we've built the number of units we need? Because by the same token, we want to build wealth in our community too, right? We don't want people always to be impoverished. I learned that lesson on the school board. Poverty is horrifying to children. We don't want our children in poverty. So it's got to be a lifting up of the poverty, getting people out of poverty. It's got to be about getting people good housing. And it's got to be about a place that people love. And then when you explain your rationale, you've got people that will see that your zoning has credibility. Right now, there's a lot of inconsistency among some of the applications of the future land use map, the FLUM. People aren't understanding, well, why does this street colored orange and this street's colored yellow when they've got the same sort of stats in terms of street metrics and size of house and so on and so forth. Doesn't make a lot of sense because it doesn't come across as being consistent. And again, mind you, a lot of this was happening during a lockdown, so people weren't meeting one-on-one, sitting at tables, drawing on maps together. I'm afraid we have to do that, especially as we move into the zoning piece. And then design by density and density by design, I have a real problem with the fact that I don't see the hard work of so many of our residents with the 4 small area plans that have already been done, with the strategic investment area, with the hydraulic small area plan, with Cherry Avenue, and with the Star Hill small area plans. I don't see that their work is reflected in those plans. And just to give you an example, in the strategic investment area, which is where Friendship Court is located, the current future land use map says the building heights have got to be between 5 and 10 stories. Well, the strategic investment area, when it was moving towards a form of zoning, a form-based code, it had 3 different tiers of zoning that all kind of ratcheted up or down relative to the intensity of development around the edges. So the residents of Friendship Court, they wanted to have no more than 3-story buildings on 6th Street, and they could inch up to 4 and 5 on Garrett. But all of a sudden, does this flum make them out of compliance because they're not a minimum 5 stories? That doesn't make sense. And another example of a citizen process, which was the West Main Street process, that was a major rezoning effort in 2016. The Fifeville and the 10th and Page and Star Hill neighborhoods just like let up a huge roar against the flats and the standard when they went up, because they are huge, big, bulky buildings that tower over their neighborhoods. So I was one of those that led the charge to rezone West Main Street, and so the west side is different than the east side of the Drury-Bryan Bridge. The east side has got no more special use permits for extra height and density. The west side too, but it's 4 stories on the east because it pays attention to the neighborhoods and the context. For example, the Cork Hotel. That hotel is well loved by the people in Star Hill because when you look at the back on Commerce, it steps down. It's got a beautiful facade. It respects that neighborhood. Now, the future land use map ignores that public process, which was 2 years of public engagement on site in churches at the Jefferson School, and says, no, now that's going to be 5 to 8 story buildings. So where is the public voice in all of this when there was already an established plan that was wrought by on-the-ground public engagement? And mind you, there's plenty of density in that. There's plenty of units, but how much is too much? And there's the last thing I'll say about that topic is, and it has to deal with explain your rationale and substantiate your claims. Because back to West Main Street, I vividly remember, and it was the same member of the consultant team, Code Studio, that was part of the consultant team for the West Main Street project, and met with myself and another counselor, and then we brought in their economics person, their housing economics person, and I was told point blank that you're going to regret having approved that special use permit for the flats and the standard because those buildings are going to be too big. And the other person who was the housing economics person from RCLCO was saying, well, the other problem with special use permits is that they build in this speculation. People start, in a way, betting on how much they can get for different buildings as they are bought and sold. Well, buildings today, real estate today is actually a global investment asset class. It's bought and sold like stocks on the market. And so this sort of phenomenon was happening, and when the flats sold in 2016 for something like $70 million, it changes our
Values.
assessments all over the city, but especially in the adjacent neighborhoods.
Sure.
So this land value inflation needs to be really investigated very carefully. And again, I'm not saying no development. I've always been a proponent of good development. It's got to follow the contours of the landscape we have. And we've got to do it in a way that allows our local developers to get in the game. The Gabe Silvermans of the world, but also Keith Woodard and Chris Henry, they know the community, whereas the Flats and the Standard, they were from some groups in Atlanta. And luxury student housing and the adjacent properties, holding on to their land in speculation, wanting to eventually put more luxury student housing there. In fact, I was approached when I was on council still by someone who was like an intermediator for an investor and a developer, and says, like, would you approve an SUP, a special use permit for student housing on West Main Street? And I said, no, not at this point. I've learned my lesson. And so that's why I've been so concerned about this overbearing attitude about we need more height, we need more bulk, we need more intensity. We need units. We need the right form. We need to know when and how we reach our affordable housing goals, but we need to articulate them carefully in terms of units, and then we need to monitor them. So that's all these things are still left unanswered in my mind with the future land use map. And so adopting a policy that has still so many unanswered questions, to me, is fraught with peril. And I don't think, personally, that is good policy. And I have made it very clear to the current council that I would really appreciate if they don't adopt the future land use map until they have the zoning ordinance underway, and let them kind of feed each other iteratively. Because interestingly enough, everyone was talking about at the last planning commission, we can amend the zoning, we can amend the future land use map when we get going on the zoning. Well, why are we building in more administrative process when we could be doing it at the same time, and at the same time really explaining to the public why this is happening, why that's happening? And then you'll get two new faces and two new pairs of eyes on the problem who have been really close to the public because they're fresh off the campaign trail, and avail yourself of their wisdom as well. So that's where I'm at. A long-winded story, but it's a very complicated problem.
Very, very good answer. And folks, we'll get to Councilor Snook here in a matter of minutes on the show. He's in our studio. Thank you, Councilor Snook, for joining us here on the show. A couple of questions that I have for you here. The West Main Streetscape project. This is something that I was very passionate about. It's been deprioritized, and I understand that there's only so many dollars that go around. West Main is the gateway to downtown, it's the gateway to UVA, and Midtown, this corridor along West Main, has become this thriving dining, shopping district that my family loves to patronize. The deprioritization of the West Main Streetscape project, and what went through your mind when you saw those events unfold?
It was discouraging, especially it made me question whether or not there was a consistency between action and kind of governing philosophy. The council has as its tenets that it's going to be a sustainable city, an equitable city. And sustainability is very much rooted in how we move. And West Main Street is a major thoroughfare. It got so much state money because the state acknowledges it as a major thoroughfare of state importance. And it's attached to the Amtrak site. So you get people are using trains, you get people using buses, people riding their bikes, people walking. That's multimodal. That means you're not dependent on fossil fuels, a single occupant vehicle. So why is the council not feeling a sense of urgency about climate change as it is about housing equity, because there is also an equity component to West Main Street. West Main Street was severed from East Main Street, the mall, during urban renewal, and that was the widening of Ridge McIntyre that was at the same time that they had the widening of Preston Avenue. So what happened? All of a sudden, West Main Street, East Main Street disconnected. East Main Street, the mall, gets enormous investments in it. It becomes an engine of economic prosperity for the city, and for quite some time it was, and some still argue, that's quite exclusive. West Main Street, what happened to that? Okay, West Main Street's sandwiched in between two historically African-American neighborhoods, which back 40, 50 years ago were majority black neighborhoods.
Star Hill and Fifeville.
Star Hill, Fifeville, 10th and Page, and not invested in at all. Becomes like an automobile row, no sidewalk investments. The trees did go in, the Zelkova trees, but woefully undersoiled, meaning there's not enough volume to sustain those trees, so that's why they're built, breaking all the paving. And when you walk that street, it is not accessible to anybody with any sort of physical disability.
That's
it's
fair.
just not.
That's fair.
So it's not an inclusive street the way it is. When you look at people waiting for buses, they're sitting on curbs. The bus stations and bus stops are pathetic. And so how is that an equitable way to conduct our transportation planning when you deprioritize that and it creates a zero-sum game, quite honestly, because all of a sudden now it's the schools against our infrastructure. The city's got to do both all at the same time, and I'm getting quite passionate about this. And the fact that we already have gotten most of our monies from the state, and we're throwing it away. And Chip Boyles was somebody that was very much aware of how to go about doing this. I keep my fingers crossed about the infrastructure bill being passed at the national level. But we've got to walk and chew gum at the same time. And to think about infrastructure, and I've heard this when I was on city council, to think about the street improvement as simply a beautification project. No, it's got some of the best solutions for stormwater management built into the way we're building in the soil, the silvicells, to sustain the street trees. It'll add 400% more canopy, which is essential to a city to alleviate the urban heat island effect, which again in our lower income neighborhoods is critical. It's critical. You get a lot more leafy green areas in Greenbrier than you have in our heart of our city, which is where a lot of our lower income, predominantly black people live. So how is that only a beautification project, and why is it not a matter of equity and sustainability? That is the question for me, and we've already invested over $3 million in it, in engineering and design, and it was all wrapped up with the rezoning from 2016. And so with the FLUM, get rid of the zoning, and with the reprioritization, get rid of that investment. It's no wonder the city does not have faith in the city's ability to stick to a plan and execute it.
I got one final question for you, the most challenging one. I think it's fair, though, and applicable for the climate we're in. I mentioned to start the program the discord and the bickering and the dysfunction. And I've been very straightforward where I stand on this. I see much of that discord and dysfunction originating with leadership, in particular and specifically the mayor. I've said that, this is me talking. If you don't agree, you can certainly please correct me if you don't agree here. I don't see our mayor currently leading in the capacity that someone in that position should otherwise be the champion of the jurisdiction and the North Star who sets the agenda and helps champion the policies of other counselors on the dais. Anywhere you want to go for this on a closing topic before we welcome Councilor Snook?
Sure, and I'm going to have as my parting thought, again, the image of an effective mayor. And as I mentioned earlier in the program, and that was Satyendra Huja. And my answer is simply going to be to stress the qualities of that mayor and ask us all to then reflect, including the current city council, including the future council that will be electing a new mayor come January. How does that comport with this presentation of a mayor who understood how to build teamwork, fostered collegiality, put the time into building relationship, met with counselors, had lunch with them, talked on the phone, had a real keen awareness of how cities are put together. It's not just one thing. It is the infrastructure. It's the schools. It's the parks. And that's the mayor has got to be someone that is as broad-based and far-reaching in their outlook as a city manager. But the mayor is someone who quite frankly, I wouldn't say manages the council, manages the agenda, but does so in a way that is inclusive with colleagues and does so in a way that brings out the best of their colleagues. And I am going to just shout out again, Satyendra Huja was my model. I got to work with that person. And it's not impossible. And when you have that kind of leadership in our form of government that maintains the clear lanes of responsibility between the policymakers and the policy executors, i.e. the city manager and the city manager's department heads, then you really see results. You see action. We passed the stormwater utility fee. That was so controversial, but now we're a model in the state, and it's critically important that we have that in place. I just bring that as one example. We were able to get the East McIntyre Park approved and moving forward now with the botanical garden, but also a bridge that crosses the railroad tracks. These are tangible items. The skate park. All of that is things that the public were able to see. And we made investments in assisted housing routinely. So I think it's not just one thing. It's many things to have a well-functioning city. And I'm going to say a sustainable, equitable city that has an authentic sense of place. And that's what, when people love where they live, they are committed to living together well in that city. And I think the mayor is an important role, and that's all I'm going to say.
Fair. I find you thought-provoking, insightful. You're a fantastic interview. Thank you for the time, Kathy.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. Always do.
We will reach out to you again.
Absolutely.
Kathy Galvin,
maybe after the election, then we can really...
I will take you up on that.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Have
Kathy
a
Galvin.
wonderful election season. And if I don't see you, have a nice Thanksgiving.
Thank you. You have a good holiday as well. Kathy Galvin, guys, we'll have Councilor Lloyd Snook here. Join us. This gentleman's been quite busy this week. Frankly, he's been quite busy all of 2021. We're very excited. We have a couple of TV stations here. Councilor Snook. Thank you. Good to see you, Kathy. A couple of TV stations watching the program here. Councilor Snook. Good afternoon. How are you?
Having a ball.
You always do. You make the job look easy, almost as if the swan on the lake, where above the lake, composed and confident and elegant. Under the lake, well, the legs are moving quite quick. We'll start with the
Lots of 3 a.m. emails.
I know. I can only imagine. You are a night owl, though. Open-ended question. Where are we today with local government and City Hall? Councilor Snook.
I think we are I always, people say, how are things going? I was cautiously optimistic.
Okay.
Sometimes more cautious than optimistic, sometimes more optimistic than cautious, but it's a balance. I'd say, we know that we need to replace Chip Boyles. We know that we will have an interim city manager. We've had some discussions about who that person might be and some interviews just this morning. And the one thing I will tell people is that we are going to try to figure out if there is some way to have some kind of public input or something before we have to name an interim city manager. But we really have to name an interim city manager by this time next week, because Chip's last day is next Friday.
Friday, right.
And so there's not a lot of time. The one thing I will say is that council has sort of decided that we are going to commit to a fairly early time to advertise for a full-time permanent position.
Okay.
But we need to get through the budget season. I mean, I'm not going to ask, or we are not going to ask somebody to start coming in, and for that matter, even for council and city government to try to get into the process of advertising and interviewing and everything else until after the budget is approved. The budget will be approved on April 15th. Monday, April 18th, we're thinking that we'll put a job posting out, and that will be for a permanent position. So we've got a plan, moving forward with it. I'm feeling good about it.
Councilor Snook, the conversations that I'm hearing is a deputy city manager and Sam Sanders getting the promotion to interim city manager. Any thoughts on that?
I think I can, normally I would say, no, I can't comment in the personnel matters, but I can tell you Sam does not want the job.
Does not want the job.
Does not want the job.
Okay. All right. I appreciate that straightforwardness. It seems as if this interim city manager.
And let me say, I think he would be excellent if he wanted the job.
Me too.
I think both Sam Sanders and Ashley Marshall, our two new deputy city managers, are both excellent. And I'm really pleased with them. But no, Sam doesn't want the job.
Okay. So both the interim city manager seems as if it's a position that obviously is a transitionary position from a personnel standpoint, because there's 2 open spots on council, and we are realistic folks. Mr. Pinkston and Mr. Wade look like the front runners to
Pretty
fill.
likely.
Yeah. I would think any kind of decision making done before having a clear-cut council is almost like an athletic director that's on his way out, hiring a football coach. You're a sports guy, and that football coach becomes a lame duck with the athletic director going out.
Right.
What do you think?
Well, we're not going to hire, and that's part of the thinking behind why we're not hiring a city manager at this time. Even if we had decided, and it's frankly one of the reasons we had decided on the timeline when we brought in Chip back in February, was that there was no point in bringing in a new city manager, with a month before the election or something like that. So yes, that factors into the process. We have to have an interim city manager. We have to have an interim city manager basically November 1. And so we will have an interim city manager by November 1. By hook or by crook, that will happen. So, but then that's part of why we're thinking that the permanent position won't get filled until the new councilors will have had a chance to get their feet wet.
Do the new councilors get a chance to get their feet wet sooner? Like Pinkston and Wade are clear-cut slam dunks here. And we'll know this on the 2nd of November, most likely
9 p.m.
Yeah, right, probably sooner when we see the early polling. Can they get their feet wet starting the 2nd?
Yes.
How so?
Well, because they are not yet councilors, they can meet with up to 2 councilors.
Okay.
And it's not a public meeting for the purposes of the Freedom of Information Act. So there may well be opportunities for, Sina and I to meet with them, or Sina and Michael, or Michael and I, and to begin the process of trying to figure out. And really, the issue for me is, I want to make sure that the councilors ourselves are agreed on certain priorities, so that we can tell the staff these are our priorities. That's one of the things that has distressed me about the last 2 years, is that in January of 2020, we had a retreat where we were all, I thought the idea was we were going to be discussing what our priorities were for the coming year. Some places, I think it's maybe either Arlington or Alexandria, their governing body, either Board of Supervisors or City Council, they construct at the beginning of the year, they construct a year-long plan, and you can look at it on a calendar. You can say, in the month of May, they're intending to take up this topic. In the month of August, they're intending to take up this topic. Then you can say, okay, they have a plan for how they're going to do their work for the year. We have no such plan. We're entirely at the whim of whatever winds are blowing. And recently, of course, those winds have been pretty powerful. So the consequence is we came in January 2020 thinking we're going to be talking a strategic plan, thinking surely that's going to lead to some, okay, ABC, top priorities, how we're going to do this. It didn't happen. And there are various reasons it didn't happen during 2020, and COVID has a significant part of it, but not only COVID. We also, of course, had the change in the city manager, and that was part of it, but not all of it. I'm hopeful that we will be able to have enough agreement among ourselves so that we will be able to, very early on in our time, get started. For example, we all can agree that there are certain basic principles that will undergird what we're doing. One is racial equity. Two is going to be climate change. That's the one that has been ignored.
No doubt.
And it's been ignored, not just, it was ignored before I became on council, but even when those of us who were newly elected said, this is important to us, we've never been able to actually get something moving. Part of that has to do with, we have a sustainability office, it's in the Public Works Department. It probably ought to be in Neighborhood Development Services. Maybe we get some different leadership, we put it in a different place, we designate a deputy city manager one of whose jobs is, your job is to make sure that the climate action plan that has been promised now for a year and a half, that it actually gets done. Your job is to figure out how we're going to infuse climate change into all of our decision making. Give you an example. Buses. We are going to need more buses for some of the expansion of the routes we're undertaking. What kind of buses do we buy? I personally think at this point it's nuts not to be buying electric buses.
Amen.
Of course, our buses right now are diesel. Some places have gone to sort of a transitional fuel using compressed natural gas. I see no reason we should be investing millions of dollars in infrastructure in what is clearly intended as a bridge to the future, when the future is just about here. If we placed the orders right now, the buses wouldn't get here until 2023. So let's not look at what the technology is in 2021. Let's look at what it's going to be in 2023. And if you look at all of the projections of economics and the market and everything else, what you see is in 2022, the expectation is that starting in 2022, it will be more costly to buy a gas-powered vehicle than an electric vehicle in terms of operating costs looking into the future. That the cost curves will have crossed at that point, and starting next year, that's going to be the wise play. I think we're also in the same position with buses. And that there's a study that's being undergone right now to determine that. And Garland Williams, the CAT director, is doing this. But at some point, I think that council and the city as a whole need to say to the city as a whole, to the city government as a whole, this is important. This is more important than maybe a few $100 over here, a few $1,000, whatever it's going to turn out to be. If it was a difference of millions and millions of dollars, it'd be a different matter, but it's not going to turn out to be that kind of a difference. It's a question of, we need to make this decision. We need to, if we have embodied climate change and carbon neutrality as truly a priority, then we ought to be willing maybe even to spend a little bit of money, a little extra money to get to that.
I think that's a no-brainer.
And so that's one of those issues that for various reasons we just haven't gotten to.
We haven't had the time.
It's
the opportunity cost of all this collateral damage.
Yeah.
That's been a distraction. I mean, Mr. Chip Boyles, we're hearing potentially the Stafford jurisdiction as the next step for Mr. Chip Boyles. Your thoughts on Mr. Chip Boyles and his short tenure here in Charlottesville?
I think Chip did, first of all, he has made some very good hires. He has done a very good job selecting deputy city managers. He's tried valiantly on some other positions. James Freeze is another excellent hire. Some other positions like HR director, we just haven't been able to fill. Hopefully we'll get around to getting the right person into that job pretty soon. There's some really good applicants right now. I think he was going along just great until the whole incident with Chief Brackney. Personally, I've said this before, I think it was the right decision for a whole lot of reasons that have not really been a part of the public discussion. But then I'll also say, and it's no secret here, that Chief Brackney and I have had our disagreements over the last year and a half, and I don't want to get into more of that because it would just everything will be colored by those comments. It's unfortunate, I think, that the way things worked, I don't think Chip handled it well. I think he
said that.
Yep.
Yeah, he would agree with you.
He made the right call. He made a decision that had to be made. One of Chip is an adherent of the good to great philosophy that says the first priority is to figure out who the right people are to have on your bus. You can move them around perhaps from one position to another, and don't obsess over which position you're putting them, but get the right people on the bus, and in some people, get the wrong people off the bus. And that's what Chip was trying to do. And I think his heart and his head were in the right place. Execution wasn't very good.
In retrospect, was the newspaper Daily Progress op-ed the right play?
It was not a well-done op-ed. I mean, part of what I do...
Was it the words or was it the outsourcing to the PR firm?
Well,
was it both?
I started with the words. I don't particularly care who wrote them. Chip signed it. It was not a well-done piece. Part of what I do as a defense lawyer is to try to figure out how to make somebody's mistake look not so bad, or somebody's potentially bad moment turn into, oh, it was self-defense. That's part of what I do, is to help frame that argument.
It's called managing perception.
Yeah, and a lot of what when I read that the op-ed piece, I thought, oh, Chip, yeah, should have said it this way. Could have taken it this way. So yeah, it was not a well done thing. I don't have a problem with him doing an op-ed. Although the fine line we walk is that we are told we're not supposed to talk about personnel matters. And as a general proposition, that is correct. We're also told, however, we're not legally prohibited from talking about personnel matters. And so some people say, well, they demand that we answer all of these questions. There are times when, even if you're legally permitted to say something, it's not smart to say that thing. And one of the problems we've got here is that there are a lot of things, yeah, we could talk about a lot of these things, but to what end? What does that really get us? Chip didn't try to make this a firing for cause, so that we would deprive her of the severance pay or anything. It is like, to use your example of the football coach, the football coach, sometimes management says, we just want to go in a different direction. That's what firing not for cause involves, going in a different direction. And I think that we had to go in that different direction.
Can you characterize the challenges of filling the city manager position, how difficult or lack of difficulty perhaps it could be? I mean, we have some very qualified individuals that have assumed that position. Dr. Richardson moved halfway across the country for that. Mr. John Blair, friend of the program, essentially because he took the interim role, is now the attorney of Stanton, right? Mr. Chip Boyles.
A quieter life.
Right, a quieter life in a charming Stanton community. Mr. Chip Boyles left a phenomenal position with the Thomas Jefferson Planning District Commission, right?
Right.
I mean, Mike Murphy, we know the list.
Well, so here's what we've seen. My immediate reaction to all of this last year when we were trying to think about how we were going to replace Teron Richardson was, who would want to come? Well, the answer is a lot of people do, because the kinds of people we want are the kinds of people who see a challenge and say, I can do that. And so we've got people who are applying for our jobs, even though they read the Twitter feeds and the Facebook posts, and they keep up with things, and they know what they're walking into, because they say, I'm a can-do person. I can do this. I want to do this. And Charlottesville is attractive for a whole lot of reasons. And the idea of, I can come in here and here's a way I can make a difference, is a powerful attractant. And we're getting very good applicants for these jobs.
And I mean, you can make a very legitimate argument. We talk about managing perception, that it's almost at rock bottom now. So the new hire has nowhere to go but up. And it's almost like, and we go back to sports because we're sports guys, a coach that takes over a team that's at the bottom of the division. Only way to go is up. And if the coach is able to do that, they become almost like someone who can take a few loaves and a couple of fish and feed hundreds, if not thousands. Right. This question for you. Is the city manager, the newly hired city manager, should the prioritization be someone of color?
I don't know that it's a priority. It's certainly something that could be viewed as an asset. But one of the things we found is that there are a lot of people who, a lot of white folks, who are able to be good leaders. And here's the thing. To be a good leader in a time of change, you need two things. You need a clear vision of the change you want to bring, and you need the ability to attract and keep a team to implement that change. Okay. When we think about the folks who have been, I've said this publicly about Chief Brackney. We applaud the vision of the 21st century policing, but after 3 years, she had not had the ability to attract and keep a team that was willing to or able to implement that vision. Not, again, the vision we don't have a problem with. It's the implementation. And so what we need, if you look at any kind of a project, a change, a reform, anything, what we need is that ability to get the right people, again, to use the metaphor, get the right people on the bus and have them stay there.
Police chief, Tito Durrett, a lot of respect for him. His tenure in the department, I mean, this man knows the police department, he knows the community inside and out. Mm-hmm. Help me understand the timeline here. Is the new police chief, the long-term police chief that's going to get hired, is this police chief hiring done after the city manager is picked by you guys? Can the new police chief be hired by an interim city manager? I mean,
that's one of the challenges that we were talking about in council today. Is typically we think of an interim city manager as someone who's just keeping the seat warm.
Right.
Somebody who is not making major substantive decisions. On the other hand, one of the things that we most need in City Hall right now is to have other people's seats being warm.
Sure.
And that means hiring more people. And that means hiring, again, an HR director. I can't remember all the different, ultimately a police chief, perhaps. We're going to have, there's a process underway for working on like an interim police chief kind of person. Michael Payne is working on that with a number of other people, another number of stakeholders in the process. There are a couple of candidates, one in particular, I think people will say, wow, that's a very impressive person to be the interim. I hope that that's the way we end up going with all of this. So that may work, but I think that even that person truly doesn't want the permanent gig. They're willing to be the interim. You know, I used to wonder what kind of a person would just want to do it for 6 months or a year. And I realized there are all kinds of people all over the world, all over the country, who do this kind of thing. We had, at our church, for example, when our rector left, we brought in an interim. And a great guy, he was a Charlottesville resident, I never knew him. But he wanted to come be the interim for a year, and hold everybody's hand for a year and say, there, it's all going to be okay. You're a healthy parish, don't worry, for a year. And then he left, and so we brought in somebody else, very good, and he goes off and does the same thing at another church, also in Albemarle County. And that's the kind of thing that they do. And there are people like that, interim police chief people, interim city manager people, who they like the challenge. They don't necessarily like the long term, but they like the challenge.
So immediately top of mind, this couldn't be a Harding or a Longo, right?
No.
Okay. I won't ask any more of that. City manager interim, Mike Murphy?
We've not been talking to Mike.
Okay. Here's a question I have for you. How much influence does council have with hiring a police chief? I mean, because we're in this time where
Well, any police chief to be hired has to be approved by council.
Okay.
It's one of the few positions where we have a say.
Do you narrow the applicant pool down? Is that approval?
No.
No. Okay. So it's signing off.
Right. Now, in fact, what will probably happen is that one or more counselors will probably be part of the interview team.
Okay.
And so we would give the city manager feedback along the way to say, not so sure about this one.
Okay.
And the city manager would hopefully be wise enough to take into account what we have to say.
I would hope so.
But it's the city manager's call, subject to our approval. The city manager can fire the police chief anytime, they don't have to ask us.
What is the influence, or where is your position, or how do you get involved with everything that's going on with the Police Civilian Review Board? I mean, because it's such a slippery slope, because the Civilian Review Board is its own entity that is accountable to citizens and separate on paper from local government. But
well, okay, the Police Civilian Review Board is a very awkward construct. And it was made more awkward by the General Assembly's change in the law back in October. So what we're working on now, and we'll be having a joint session with the current PCRB on Tuesday to try to figure out what the next step is really going to look like. Michael Payne and I have been meeting with a couple members of the PCRB to try to negotiate some kind of decisions about some of this. The basic decision point that we're coming down to is in some ways it just seems like a nitpicky practical problem, but it turns out to have broader consequences. The issue is, and I will say that council is not interested in giving the PCRB binding disciplinary authority, which is one of the things that the statute permits. But there is nobody on council, none of the five of us are in favor of that. That's not going to happen. What is likely is that the group might have a power to recommend something, but not to be binding. And part of the reason for that is that you have to let the police chief run the police department. If you don't let the police chief run the police department and insist on the police chief's own standards, then you set that person up for failure. You set that person up to not be in charge. So we don't want that. So the second question is, well, okay, will the board have the power to investigate everything, or only the things that meet certain criteria? And one of the things we found is that over the last year or so we've had a PCRB, there have been like 20 complaints made, and most of them come down to, this officer was rude to me. Okay, question, do we really need to have a public hearing on that? Or is it sufficient to say that the commander of the patrol division goes down to the person and says, hey, this is what, let's see your body-worn video, let's see your camera, and let's talk about this. There's an awful lot of stuff that people talk about in terms of police action that they have complaints about, that they don't really want heads to roll. They just want to be heard that they have been, they would say, mistreated. And fortunately, with the body-worn videos that we've got, we can usually know what has happened. We can usually have a pretty good feel for that. So, but this issue of what happens when the complaint comes in, does it get immediately investigated by internal affairs or by the watch commander or whoever? Does it immediately go to the executive director of the PCRB, who then goes and finds a private investigator to call the right people? I personally think that what we ought to be doing is to say, let's let it go through the police department, but the executive director of the PCRB gets to sit in on interviews, gets to watch interviews, gets to be a part of it in real time, and to be able to say to the person doing the investigating, ask that question, talk to that witness, so that, because here's ultimately, remember, this is a review board. It is not a primary investigative board, it's a review board, and the idea is to review the decision that the police department has made. And one of the decisions is, has the investigation been a solid investigation? Did it just get whooshed under the rug? And if the investigation was not adequate, then the board can have its own investigation. Well, the easiest way to make sure that the investigation is adequate is to have the PCRB director, who in this case, we've hired a guy named Hansel Aguilar, who I'm very impressed with. He's got experience both as an investigator of police misconduct in the District of Columbia and served on the Fairfax PCRB itself. To have him sit in on, ride herd on, however you're going to characterize it, on the investigation. And you can know, in fact, if Sergeant Houzes, is calling up the witness, and they're sharing the results of that with Mr. Aguilar. Mr. Aguilar says, you would have a really good investigation if you'd go call that other witness. He's going to call the other witness. Of course he is. And then, so it's the easiest way I know of to make sure that the investigation from the get-go is properly done.
We'll close with two more questions. I'm mindful of your time, and I'm grateful for you coming on the show. Yeah. Thank you. What's the message to the community about the discord and the theater, if you may? Well, is it wait to January 1?
In large part, yes. It will be different come January 1. I've said all along that one of the things that we on council need to do is to do a better job of modeling good behavior. The mayor and I have had our difficulties. I don't think that what she's been doing recently qualifies as modeling good behavior, but I hope that we'll be able to make that change going forward. The other question of what the audience, what the folks either watching or participating via Zoom, or if and when we get back to in-person meetings, how those get conducted.
I'm terrified of that. I'm going to get out of your way here. I apologize for interrupting here. Councilor Snook, when we go back to these in-person meetings, I'm terrified that it's going to be back to, for lack of a better phrase, this argumentative circus.
And that's an issue that we're thinking about. I don't know what the answer is, but on the one hand, there's the First Amendment. You have a right to say what you want to say. There are very few limits that we can place. Frankly, I'm not sure we can try to say, please don't be gratuitously insulting to people. Please address issues. Please,
but why
about personalities.
We have to do that as I know this is it's just. It just reminds me of behavior from the schoolyard, and it's not you. All right, how about we close on this? And this is another thing that I'm trepid and concerned about, and I do this. I'm concerned about it because, Charlottesville. I live in Albemarle County, but Charlottesville, in a lot of ways, is Central Virginia, as we all know. I'm concerned about this as someone who owns a business called I Love Seville. I'm concerned about this as someone who has some real estate positions in downtown Charlottesville. And frankly, I'm concerned about this just because of someone who tries to embody the golden rule and just wants the community to go forward positively like you do. Have you thought about what the next 69, 70 days could be with the mayor and what she may be trying to do? And then the second part of the question would be, are you concerned at all about if there's no associations with her being in government, what could be just from as a citizen with government?
Let me say this. I've certainly had my disagreements with the mayor. I will say this about her. I think that although she and I disagree about what this means, I do not doubt that she wants what she would perceive to be the best Charlottesville possible.
Okay.
I absolutely believe, as a matter of her good faith, that she believes that what she's doing helps get there. That's an important starting point, and it's one that I don't want to discard. And I don't want to immediately jump to the conclusion that, oh my God, she's going to take us all down, or whatever. People have made dire predictions. I don't get that sense from her at all. So I'm not quite as doomy and gloomy as you are in that respect.
Okay. Well, thank you for your time. I am grateful for your time. I, in many ways, admire you, and am impressed with your patience and your commitment to the community. And thank you for the insight.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Lloyd Snook, thank you. Thank you for joining us. J-Dubs, if we could offer a little out there for Councilor Snook with the studio, that would be great. I have a couple of other items that I'd like to get out of the notebook here on the show, and in particular the news that came from the University of Virginia about the vaccination for all employees. This is a mandate that is going to happen. You have a good afternoon. Thank you, Councilor Snook. If you didn't see this news, December 8th, all UVA employees must be vaccinated. It's an official announcement from UVA. I think it's about time that this decision was made by the University of Virginia, this mandate of all employees to be vaccinated. I think there was, in a lot of ways, a lot of hypocrisy where the health system was megaphoning and utilizing its platform about the catastrophic impacts and effects of unvaccinated individuals and what it's doing to hospital beds, taking those beds and keeping individuals who needed general medicine care or emergency room care and impacting their ability to get said care because personnel was being monopolized and cannibalized dealing with unvaccinated individuals. So December 8th, the official announcement, all UVA employees must get vaccinated. And I'll just say finally, thank goodness. And a little bit of news here that came from Councilor Snook. You will see this in the media outlets undoubtedly. Sam Sanders will not be the next interim city manager at Charlottesville. He is currently the deputy city manager for operations. Councilor Snook just confirmed on the interview that Mr. Sam Sanders does not want the interim city manager position. So that undoubtedly is news for Charlottesville and City Hall. Also, a couple of bits of news that came out. Mike Murphy, not on the list for interim city manager. He at one time held that position some years ago. And also some news, neither Tim Longo nor Chip Harding in the running for interim police chief or permanent police chief here in the city of Charlottesville. Today's show, I think, an incredibly impactful one. You know, I'm going to close on this. I am very much looking forward to policymakers and decision makers and leadership in this community that is stable, consistent, reliable, and in the background. That's leadership when the story and the policy making is not about you, but about the jurisdiction in totality. And we haven't had that for some time. Thank you for joining us today on a Friday on the I Love Seville show. My name is Jerry Miller, and it's an absolute pleasure to connect with you guys through the I Love Seville network. Take care.